Hi, my name's Anton McConville. Today I'm presenting personality hacking with natural language processing and CSS Houdini. I live and work in Ottawa in Canada. I work for IBM. Spent many of the last few years building cloud-based examples, mostly mobile, to showcase IBM technology, whether it be through sort of the Watson artificial intelligence and natural language processing suite to more recently working with OpenShift and creating cloud native applications with service mesh and with serverless computing, things like that. I have a background in design and development. This presentation and these projects are all passion projects. They're all sort of almost like hobbies, but they're sort of projects to dig into new emerging technologies. So for example, Houdini, web components, web audio, and also to stretch design ideas and have some fun creatively. And, you know, really most of all to sort of learn a little bit more about songwriting and the lyricists and the changes in their personality over time. The presentation has 3 parts, so I'm going to go through the background of the natural language technology that I'm using to sort of mine the insights, and spend a bit of time looking at CSS Houdini. In the second part, I'm only really going to skim the surface of web audio and sort of just give a demo of that. All of my code is open source, and I'll share the repos at the end. There's a lot of different pieces of technology involved in this presentation, so I just sort of want to get the most out of the lyrics and Houdini this time around. So let's sort of just look quickly at the theory. So there's this product called Personality Insights from IBM, part of the Watson suite. I'm just going to show you how it works. You can take any body of text. So in this case, here's a 2012 debate from Barack Obama. All the text is in here. You know, as he's been speaking it during the debate. I'll push the analyze button, and in this demo, it's playing those words through the Watson Personality Insights API, and then the output looks like this. So there's just over 7,000 words analyzed, like 6,000 to get some kind of confidence. And it creates a summary, it creates, you know, consumer needs, values. The thing that I'm interested in is this personality part. And it is broken into 5 different areas called the Big 5 personality traits. It's a really good Wikipedia page that sort of goes through the background of this. I'm going to sort of dig into it a little bit more in a second or two as well. But if we hop back here, you'll see it's scoring President Obama's debate speech on each of these things: openness, conscientiousness, introversion, extroversion, agreeableness, and emotional range. And it's putting them on a percentile. In addition, it gives sub-traits for each of those 5 things, and scores them on a percentile basis as well. So you can see the sort of API that I'm using. You can experiment with this for free. You get a certain amount of calls for free. It's fun to do with your own work. If you have a blog post or if you've written something substantial, it's fun to sort of have a bit of an insight into your own stuff. So that's the sort of background on the API that I'm using. These are the Big 5 personality traits. So openness is an appreciation for art and emotion. Conscientiousness is a sort of measurement of organization, self-discipline. Extroversion versus introversion is how you're projecting your energy and your moods and your sociability. Agreeableness is your tendency to work well with others, the level of cooperation, compassion for others. And then emotional range. So in the Watson world, it's called emotional range. In the Big 5 personality traits, it's called neuroticism. And it's a degree of emotional stability and impulse control. And so how am I getting these things? So what I'm doing is I'm taking an artist, looking at, you know, their body of work, their albums. So in this case, we're looking at Coldplay. This is Chris Martin in the Viva La Vida era. Taking that Viva La Vida album, all the songs on there. So Viva La Vida, for example, is one of the songs on there. And that collection of songs playing those through the Watson personality insights. So the lyrics from those songs, collecting them together for that album, putting that through the API for the personality insights, and then it's given me that report of the big 5 personality traits for that album. And I'm doing that for sort of all of the albums for Coldplay or for whatever artist I'm looking at. And I've looked at Bowie, I've been looking at the Beatles, I looked at the Hamilton musical. I'm going to sort of hop around some of those projects a little later too. This is a photograph from Coldplay in concert that I took. It was really moving, and I loved the confetti. It was, lots of light from fireworks and balloons and these cool watches that we had on our arms that lit up in sync with the songs. So it's very moving and colorful. And I wanted to see if I could visualize this with some form of confetti, which is where the seed sort of got planted to use Houdini. And like I was saying, Coldplay now have 8 albums. So going from 2000 to 2019, the most recent one was Everyday Life, just sort of late last year. So what I do is I sketch the artists, as well. And I sort of work with the color palette to try and build a design idea around how I want to present the data for each of them. So just sort of look at, this is my Illustrator, the Adobe Illustrator files. These are the Bowie images that I drew. These are the ones here for Coldplay that you've just seen. They all sort of start with like a very weird sort of blob sort of body that I just sort of dress to, I research and dress. I've done one for the Beatles more recently as well. I use color palettes from Pantone to match and sort of tie into like how they were dressing at the time to get some consistency going for those. And so, I can sort of go through how that project turned out for Coldplay. And this is what it sort of looks like. So here, what I've done is I've made, the Chris Martin era figure be front and center. And you can see I've animated the changing of the measurement of the percentiles for each of the big 5 personality traits for each of those albums over time. And I've sort of done it deliberately like this. So I had in mind to, immerse that Chris Martin drawing alongside these big bar charts because I want to turn them into confetti so that he's surrounded by confetti at some point. Now, we'll look at how I did that or how well I did that. But it's neat to sort of look through this cycle of animation because you can see album by album that, things are changing. The lyrics are measuring differently for each of these personality traits. And, you can see here, for example, Head Full of Dreams is a bit more upbeat. Everyday Life is certainly a bit more serious an album. This is their first album. It's a lot of organization and sort of cooperation, and similarly so here, but a little bit more openness. And as I sort of progress through, we're getting sort of more emotional range in Viva La Vida, and sort of Milo's Xyloto. And yeah, I think a really good way of starting to sort of compare them is by plotting over time. So here I'm just using chart.js, taking the data from each year and drawing it on a line chart. And you can see sort of instantly how, variable things are over time. So if I also just switch to sort of looking at the albums in bar chart form side by side as well, the big sort of outlier is Ghost Stories here and Agreeableness. And, he wrote that album as his marriage was breaking up with Gwyneth Paltrow. So there's a lot more sort of sympathy within there. There's a lot more melancholy inside it, a lot more hope. It's a really beautiful album. But, many of the other sort of previous Coldplay albums to that were a lot more about love songs. And indeed, A Head Full of Dreams after it, they wrote the year after it as almost a reaction to Ghost Stories. I deliberately wanted a more upbeat, cheerful album. So it has songs like A Head Full of Dreams on there. It has Adventure of a Lifetime, Hymn for the Weekend. Whereas Ghost Stories has Magic and Always in My Head and Sky Full of Stars on there. So they're songs more, you know, about loss and about the sort of difficulties of that relationship. And then sort of as you look at everyday life is really starting to, you know, if you look at the 5 preceding albums, it's really lifted up in terms of extroversion. And it's very different lyrically from the others in that it's looking at social issues like the refugee crisis, you know, racial injustice. So they've diverted themselves from the sort of love song type formula of the past and started looking more seriously at social issues. And, you know, openness is relatively static. The sort of measurement of creativity is relatively static. It peaks at Viva La Vida, so that's the one that's the most sort of creative. And certainly what surprised me was, you know, it's also one of the ones that's showing up as most introverted, because visually they're quite extroverted in it, but lyrically it's the most open album that they've recorded, according to, you know, this sort of analysis. If you look at something like Trust here, you can see how Ghost Stories, again, you know, that very reflective album is really, really different from the others in terms of the level of trust within the lyrics. So that's a sort of interesting feature. And then sort of you look at things like cautiousness, you know, Ghost Stories these are all a lot more sort of cautious albums, and they're almost flitting between the different sort of, one album's more cautious than the next. They're almost reacting against each other. So you sort of see the general way it works. I'm going to show you sort of the data model behind this. It starts off with a timeline. So if I can just find it here. And the timeline is, it's really a JSON file. I've got blocks, one sort of JSON entry for each album. So I've called them an era, Parachutes Era, Rush of Blood to the Head, Viva La Vida. So one for each album. There's an SVG image that I've drawn using Illustrator to represent each album. And then there's a text file with the song lyrics in there. So for instance, Parachutes is in here, so Don't Panic. Yellow is in here somewhere. Sparks, so all these great songs, there's Yellow. And it's just the words of them. And so what I'm doing with the timeline, I have this Node.js file called Paperback Writer. It's a line reader. It's reading each of the entries in that timeline JSON file, invoking personality insights, reading, you know, the text file with the lyrics in there, and just playing that through, and then adding that into the timeline and writing a brand new file called coplay.json. And so if I sort of do that really quickly here, you can see how quickly it's working. It's 8 albums, it's run it 8 times, and we should get a new coplay.json file right here. And you can see, you know, it's got this timeline, it's got the same timeline stuff in there, but it also has the analysis from what's in there with the different scores in there. So that's how it's tying together. And there's a similar model for the Beatles. In the Beatles case, I've used the same approach, but sort of with, if I can quickly find it, here we go. So in here, I've sort of also started to include the song titles in there. So I'm going to go more in this direction in the future, and I'll show you why I'm doing that in a little while. I've enhanced the timeline data a little bit. that sort of brings us to, you know, the second part, which is looking more at the sort of Houdini technology. And like I was saying, I wanted to try and get some aspect of confetti going, to see if I could sort of start bringing that style into my little application. So Houdini's part of a collection of new APIs that are emerging, that reach into the CSS engine, and this API, the Paint APIs, is one of them. That's the one that I'm using and showcasing today. And it's really cool. It allows you to draw backgrounds using the Canvas API on your DOM elements, and then to be able to set that as a style using custom CSS classes that you declare. So I just quickly go through some of that to show you that in action. So if I just pop back here and look at the Houdini version, you can see hopefully the confetti bar charts going up and down. So this is my attempt at confetti. And if I was to open up the inspector and choose those, so there's a CSS class for each one. This is extra version. For example, here's one for emotional range. I think I'm flitting around them a little bit differently, but here you can see it's calling the background image paint confetti, so that's what the background image is. And then I've got these three custom parameters: color, limit, and size. So I can dynamically change the color. If I was to change it to be purple, for instance, you can see it's changing color to be purple. Again, if I change it to be red, it's changing to be red. And I can change the sort of size of those confetti flakes in there, so making them really big or making them really tiny. And I can change the amount in there. So if I reduce it down to 100, see it a little differently. So, you know, it's giving you that sort of capability of changing the style dynamically. I did a similar thing with stripes. So same bar charts this time around. There's a custom class that's drawing diagonal stripes within there. And if I was to hook into one of those, I can do the same sort of thing again. I can change it to be purple, for instance, dynamically, just in the same way that you would change any CSS element here. I can change the size of the gap between the stripes, so it's really small, really big, giving you more of a pinstripe effect, and then the width of the stripes themselves. So, you know, the really small lines, really thick lines. So it gives you that sort of hint of being able to style things a little bit differently, either in reaction to data or just to sort of shake things up or riff on a style system, if you like. When you start to look at the code for that, this is the sort of anatomy of the CSS class. You've got, you know, a class where you declare the name of it, and then you've got your input properties. So in my case, I had input properties for, and in the stripes, like the gap between the stripes, the width of the stripes themselves, the color of the stripes. And then there's this paint call. So they all have this paint call where it passes in the context, the HTML5 context, that's your canvas that you're drawing on, the geometry size of that, the height and width. And then you can just use HTML5 canvas calls as you would, where you're drawing just on a regular HTML5 canvas surface. So a good example here is the stripes one, where you can see I'm declaring these input properties for color, gap, and width. Here in the paint method, I'm actually reading what those are and then putting them as local variables like color, gap, and width, and then calling draw, and we're passing in the HTML5 context and the geometry, so the dimensions, and just drawing the stripes. And you can see it's begin path, stroke style, line width, move to, line to, standard HTML5 canvas stuff. And I've just got a little algorithm for filling the thing with stripes there. And similarly, so in the confetti one, this time it's using sort of random placement of those things, but I'm just drawing, rectangles and placing them somewhere in a certain size and reading those parameters for size and limits and so on in there. So that's how you sort of draw those things. You end up with a few files, your standard HTML file for your DOM elements, your standard CSS file where you define your class, where you fill in the details for your class. And then there's a JavaScript file, like I showed you, where you're defining the class itself, and another one to register it. My sort of tips for building your own stuff: think of really fresh ideas to enhance the user experience as opposed to just, using it for the hell of it. I think there's going to be a sort of new world where this stuff is going to be emerging, custom CSS classes, custom DOM elements with web components. I think it's a really fascinating world that's emerging. Sort of start with just the raw canvas first and then move it into that sort of HTML skeleton for it and sort of test iteratively. Experiment with the variables once you get in there, because more ideas will pop to life once you see them. So I'm going to just really demo how I've used Web Audio with that, just to show the sort of interaction between the two things. So here we'll get a little clip of Paradise by Coldplay, and you can see the confetti there starting to move. I'm measuring the amplitude using the Web Audio API. Again, all of my code here is open source. I'll put the links at the end and you can see how I'm doing that. But I'm invoking the CSS parameters on that sort of file and changing the size of the confetti, changing the color of it in reaction to the amplitude. So it's not very scientific, it's just sort of looking at the peaks of it and changing, but it's effective. So there's power in that as well, to be able to sort of dynamically use these styles in different ways. So that's sort of another interesting side of it. So just to sort of quickly summarize, why does any of this matter? So I think it opens a new world for creative visualization. It's a real sort of crossover between design and implementation. So, as part of a design system, you start building these custom CSS classes. Your visual designers can figure out like how they want the design elements. The engineers can work with the visual designers to create a set of those that can be reused and scaled and set up differently depending on, what aspect of the website needs to work in different ways, and even dynamically in reaction to different interactions or data. They work really beautifully with flex and grid systems, easy to share and reuse. From the natural language sort of point of view, I'm really passionate about the idea of using that in businesses even to learn more about our interactions with clients and customers and how, we see ourselves. So really quickly, I just wanted to show you where I'm going with some of this stuff. So I've been working on a Beatles example. If I just pop over here and show you. And so what I'm realizing is, and I've done a few examples now. So my Bowie example looks like this, where I've built a little social network of all of the David Bowies and used tweets to share the data inside there. So and for the Hamilton one, it's really interesting here. It's a whole play with just different characters as opposed to different albums or eras. And what I've done is picked out each of their words and compared them side by side. And this is remarkable in that it's all written by one person through hip hop, and yet there's very distinctive personality traits showing through. So that's, just hopping around those different projects. I'm realizing it's too much work to keep creating new designs from each time, and I want a standard way of doing it so I can just really concentrate on looking more at lyrics from now on. I'll probably blog more about this Beatles one in the coming weeks, as opposed to go into the details now. But what I wanted to show, so this is done through web components. It's reusable. I'm going to go back and put Bowie into the same format, Coldplay into the same format. I'm starting to use the lyrics, so the song titles in here, so that you can sort of relate the song titles to what's going on through the traits as time is changing. And then here, what I'm doing, if you look at the psychedelia era, there's very subtle, but I've got some Houdini going on down here for little flowers. If I make them be red, you can see them more easily. And it's just random little flowers drawn. And, you know, I can change the size of them, for instance. So here they're bigger. I can change the number of petals in each of the flowers. So they look a bit more like snowflakes if I put lots in there. And I can change the number that's showing up in there. So if I just change it to be 10, it's maybe a little, you can see it a little easier. So you can see that, you know, there's the prospect for being able to dynamically style things to a theme, which is really interesting. Again, we sort of look at here, I've put a subtle zebra crossing style in there. So if I again change it to be purple, you can see to sort of mimic the Abbey Road. And I'm starting to use these custom styles to subtly sort of pay homage to the album covers or the themes that are going on in there. Here you've got like little heads showing like the Hard Day's Night cover on there. I really love this one with a sort of scribble effect like the scribble in the Revolver album. So again, if I change this color to be red, you can see it a little bit more. And here I've got a sort of wobble in the scribbles. If I change that to be a bigger wobble, you can see the difference in the gaps in there. So fun ways of sort of using that technology. And again, looking at sort of the timelines of the Beatles, you can see the emotional range dips for the psychedelia era, and you know climbs again as they progress through, and their openness peaks at the psychedelia era, so their creativity is at its peak at that point. Again, I'm going to blog more about this project. I just wanted to sort of give you a glimpse of where I'm going with it, using web components and sort of create in a standard way. And I hope to do another talk in the future with a few different new artists. I want to do Prince, I want to do some Crowded House, Radiohead, like get some more albums going. And at some point I'd really like to be able to cross compare the artists as well and sort of work through that kind of thing. So that's a really lightning fast overview of these crazy projects, and a little bit of Houdini in there, a little bit of Web Audio. I didn't dig into the web components. Hopefully another time I can sort of come back and show you where all of this is going. Really grateful to CityJS for the opportunity to talk, and wish everyone well. Hope you've got something out of this presentation. If you really liked it, here are my GitHub repos with some of those projects in there. And you can contact me as Anton MC on Twitter. Again, really grateful for the opportunity and for your time. Hope all goes well for the rest of the year. Thanks very much.
So your talk went really well, Anton. Are you happy with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely sort of given me more insight into myself and in the way I'm presenting. I'd much sooner have done it live, obviously, but yeah, I was really happy with how it came together. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a very exciting project. I'm sure we're going to have loads of questions on it. I'm going to start us off with, why Coldplay, Beatles, and Bowie?
So I started with Bowie mostly after he died, because I found myself watching lots of videos and interviews, and I almost became a bit obsessed. So it was like trying to build a timeline and draw the different icons of him, and as I was drawing them, he was really distinctive era by era. And I thought, you know, when he's coloring his face and wearing different clothes, is he also writing songs differently? And that's why I wanted to use the psychology insights tools to see if there was a different psychology in each era. And then Coldplay was mostly because they were just really amazing live. The Beatles, because I learned guitar to the Beatles songs. So I'm just, you know, I want to do more and more of them. I've a teenage son who just this weekend got me to help him do Mac Miller, who I knew nothing about.
Okay.
And yeah, he was really into that. So we've found a way of doing it pretty fast now. So more automated. Ever just since I've given the talk, I could almost give a new talk on how we've automated it. So.
Well, we've got 10 minutes. We've also got a couple of questions, so we should probably open those first. So the first one, and this comes from Michael, do we have to run CSS Houdini on an external server?
Yeah, I think that there may be ways of using some cross-scripting thing, or, you know, cross-site scripting thing, but I've not found any other way of doing it. You do need to load the JavaScript in there, and actually, sorry, I'm going to rewind. You can do it all locally. You don't need an external server for it. You can do it all just the same way that you're using JavaScript and CSS for local development.
Okay, but it does need to be loaded up on a server. Is that right? Even if it's a local one. I don't think it does actually. I think you can get away with it. Even better, even lower barrier of entry. That's fantastic. Yeah. So the next one is all about performance. Have you experienced any performance issues while rendering with Houdini?
Yes. So depending on what you want to do and how sophisticated your drawing is, it's HTML5 canvas beneath the covers. So for the confetti, for instance, it was pretty busy, and I animated that. So there's no natural animation. I'm cheating by passing in a trigger to get it to animate. And yeah, so the more action you put into your drawing, the higher the hit on performance. There are some really sweet aspects of it as well, like if you're used to drawing with HTML5 canvas, in that you usually have to measure pretty carefully when you're working with HTML5 canvas, and then write your own code to dynamically change your rendering. With CSS Houdini, you get a whole bunch of that for free. Like, so you're changing the dimensions of your HTML elements. It's passing the dimensions of those in and compensating, and it does a really nice job. It's almost a nicer way of using the Canvas API.
Yeah, it can be tricky working with the Canvas API, but I wonder whether you think Houdini is going to make it easier. Is the extra abstraction a good thing, do you think?
I've been wondering about that in general, because it's like definitely hitting that crossover between design and development. And I don't know if it's going to be, it's going to take a special breed of animal to want to get into that sort of crossover. For a lot of like designers, it might be a bit too technical for them to program in the Canvas side. For a lot of software engineers, it might be too much design to get into. So there's a definite sort of overlap, and I think there's an element of it's solving a problem, or it's a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist to some extent. So I think it's going to find its way, and I think the secret really is within those style systems and being able to dynamically change the style of something in reaction to data or in reaction to interaction of it, and that's new, and so that's really interesting for me. I think it's offering a lot of scope for that.
Yeah. Speaking of scope, web components bring loads of it, and that's what our next question is about. Dwayne started by saying it was a great talk, so thank you on his behalf. What went into creating and implementing your interface with web components?
Yeah, so I've just started doing that, and I've been using them within my work at IBM more recently as well. So I'm kind of phobic of the big like JavaScript libraries. I'm old and jaded by all of this stuff, and they come and go. So I really like a lot of the aspects of things like React, where it's using componentized blocks in there. But I really also, it's a lot of appeal for me to have them work natively. So just sort of digging into the native usage of the components of like building your custom HTML blocks and locking the CSS to each of those things works pretty effectively. And yeah, my code is sort of open source. It's fairly easy to follow, I think, and it works pretty well. There are a few good you know, tutorials on Mozilla and things like that to teach you how to do it. Where it falls short is loading them, because there isn't a really cool way of, you know, loading the files independently. You need to load all of your definitions for the templates together, and then each of the JavaScript implementations for those templates can be loaded separately. If you could sort of segment them and load them all in blocks, it would be much, much better.
Hopefully somebody's listening who can help put that into the browser, I guess.
Yeah, or I could step up and contribute. So yeah,
you're setting yourself a big challenge there, I think.
Yeah.
On that note, we're going to have to call time on this Q&A because the next talk is about to finish, about to start, sorry. I am ever so slightly that our conversation wasn't interrupted by police sirens. I was promised that they would.
Well, yeah, I think you just missed one, and you certainly just missed some construction in the condo next door. They're building a condo next door and blasting, so you missed that by minutes, which is a good thing.
That is a good thing. On that note, I'm going to leave before the next blast. Anton, your talk was absolutely amazing. I'm looking forward to rewatching it again and really diving into the code. I love hip hop, so I'm looking forward to taking your project and applying some hip hop to it. Not Mac Miller though; it'll be good hip hop.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Anton.
Thanks.
To everybody watching along, if you head back over to YouTube, the next talk from Jemima will be starting any moment now. Right, and Anton, we'll see you again.
Cheers.